I was teaching a business law class, and part of that class is I had mock trials. And these were kids who had never heard of this before. But part of it was so getting up and giving an opening statement about a case that we were going through. And one of the girls in the class came up to me, the week before she was doing it, and says, "Professor, I'm not ready for this. I can't speak in front of people. You have to let me out. I get too nervous." And I said, "I'm not letting you out. You're going to get up and you're going to do a great job. I'm not worried about it. You're going to be fine." So because she was so nervous, she prepared and she absolutely gave the best opening statement of anyone in the semester.
Welcome to the Flywheel Effect, the podcast where ambition meets expertise in the world of luxury home services. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or a forward-thinking professional, this is your platform for growth, profit, and prosperity. Each episode, we dive deep into how to leverage data for smarter business decisions and share insights that help you transition from technician to visionary. Let's jump in.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Flywheel Effect, sponsored by Vital, where you can come and make your business even better. I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know why. I should write it down. Or maybe we should let this go.
By the way, every single time you say I should write this down, every time, 100% of the time.
I think we're going to leave this in the episode, and we're going to start over live, right? Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Flywheel Effect, sponsored by Vital, where we use metrics, benchmarking to make your business better and more optimized. And I think that one was okay, Matt, but we're going to use this. Maybe they'll use this as an outtake. But how are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing, man. It's so funny. I mean, we could riff on this for a long time, but it's literally the difference of just how humans operate. Like, our personality types are so vastly different, right? Because I couldn't imagine getting on this podcast without a script and rehearsing that script. And but I think there's just beauty in just appreciating how people are different.
It's very me, right? Why hide it?
Well, and exactly. And what's also very me is how frustrated I was at the gym today when I realized I had forgot my razor, right? And Friday's my content day for the most part. That's when I'm usually in front of the camera, and I got to shave because otherwise, I've got the 5 o'clock shadow from 2 days ago shaving, and it's not quite as beautiful as your beard. So it's that weird in between. And I'm like, damn it, how did I forget this shaver today? So anyway, that's what I'm dealing with this morning is, 2 days worth of stubble. And anyway, it's rough.
Which is the exact opposite. Like I drove to Vermont. I'm in Vermont today, as you can, for those who watch the background, and I woke up at 5 a.m. to get in the car and didn't shower. So I decided to just put on a hat, right? It's just about as good I'm going to get. So, and let it roll. And you'll see I'm wearing glasses today, which I never do because when you know what we're doing today, Matt? We are doing a book review session.
Yeah.
As we mentioned in one of the last podcasts, we decided we're going to read 4 books. And book review is the wrong word. This is more like Vital Book Club. And over the course of this year, 1 book a quarter, we are going to be reading that book, and this is going to be the episode that goes through that book and why we think it was either interesting or appropriate for our listening public to read along with us. And our first book was Matt's selection of a recent book, and that book is Coach the Person, Not the Problem by, what was her name? I forgot Matt. What was the name of the author? I forgot that. I got the book name, but I forgot
it was Michelle.
Marcia Reynolds.
Yeah, Marcia Reynolds. Thank you.
Marcia Reynolds. Yeah, got that sleep in it. So she's a professional coach. She teaches coaching, and she has a method to how coaching can be a lot more effective on making people a better, I would say better, more fully actualized version of themselves from the way I read that book.
Yeah, and I think when we think about coaching, or at least for me, you look all around you. There's examples of great coaches, right? You have sports coaches, but a component of incredible businesses is the fact that there's great coaches inside of that business, right? Like the best leaders are the best coaches, or so I've experienced, and that's why I think this book is good for every business leader, not just those of us who are who have a coaching title. Any leaders or even people who are aspiring to be leaders can, I think, get a lot from studying coaching.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think there's different types of coaching. When we think of sports coaching, it's a little more of the how to and how to work together and be taught tasks. But she's talking about coaching a little differently, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you on the sports coaching analogy until you get into the pros, right? I think below that, once you get up to the pros, the coach isn't the best. The coach doesn't have is not the source of truth on how to play the game, right? These professional players are. So the coach is basically trying to get the most from the team with a bunch of individual players who are making a lot more money than he is, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, up until that point, probably all the way through collegiate, I would say that that's probably true.
Yeah, the perfect example of that is, what was his first name? But Coach Daly, he was the coach of the first dream team in the Olympics. He was the coach of the Nets, my home team at the time. He actually did a pretty good job. But he was they hired him to be the coach of the dream team. And one of the reasons they hired him is because he was not going to get in the players' way of playing basketball. Mm-hmm. But they also knew that he was the perfect person to manage probably the 12 biggest egos in the world in basketball and somehow meld them into a team. And obviously worked great. That's still considered the greatest basketball team of all time that ever played competitive basketball. For those who don't know, that was 92 Olympics. Had Jordan, had Hakeem, Patrick Ewing, Scottie Pippen, Barkley, Stockton, Malone, all the world's greatest from in the 80s and the 90s. Magic, Michael, everybody, Larry Bird. So to put all those on one team and have them just dominate the way they did was a masterful bit of coaching from a mental perspective, which is what this one's about.
Yeah, no doubt.
I think it's good to give people the intro to this so they know what it's about. I'm going to read the summary, the first few lines of the summary of the book that they give us on Amazon. So Coach the Person, Not the Problem, A Guide to Using Reflective Inquiry by Marcia Reynolds. From a founding member of the coaching movement comes a detailed guide to mastering one of a coach's toughest, something's wrong here on the thing. They miss a word. From a founding member of the coaching movement comes a detailed guide to mastering one of a coach's toughest, thoughtfully reflecting clients' words and expressions back to them, toughest jobs back to them so they see themselves and their world through new eyes. Coaches rely far too much on asking open-ended questions, says Marcia Reynolds, but questions only seek answers. Inquiry provides insight. When instead of just questions, clients hear their thoughts, opinions, and beliefs spoken by someone else, it prompts them to critically consider how their thinking affects their goals. And Reynolds cites brain science to go through why this makes a big impact. So I think that's the key difference here is that maybe there's a way that you can explain this, Matt. What does she mean by reflective inquiry?
Yeah, and what's interesting is that as I read the book, I felt like the title didn't actually match the content, which is interesting. Although I think there's a challenge around that for books like this. But I think to summarize what reflective inquiry means to me, or at least what I took away from it, and this is the beauty of a book club, is everybody takes different components out of it. But reflective inquiry for me is allowing somebody, for example, a coaching client or an employee, to hear their thoughts translated by somebody else or reflected by somebody else, their thoughts and statements, in a way that helps them to come up with their own conclusions and overcome some of the barriers, whether they're mental barriers or emotional barriers or belief barriers, without somebody telling them how to do it. Because I think what a lot of us have experienced is when it's our own idea or our own revelation, we're a lot more likely to do something about it.
Yeah, and I think that was the key for me. I read the first 5 pages, and I'm like, this is really interesting. And I feel like I was doing some of it naturally. I try to summarize when I'm listening to someone and get it back to them. But I never really focus on the emotions. And she really does. Like, what's the emotive state of someone as they're making a certain comment? Because I think that's such an important part of reflection. But in those first 5 pages, it appeared to me that the way she defines coaching is not someone who is an expert in anything, because it's one who by through this process of reflective inquiry allows the client, and she says that every coaching client is her terminology, to find that outcome, that resolution that leads to success. And I think it's really powerful, right? Like, it's much more powerful to have someone to give essentially the guardrails that get someone to where they need to go. Because I think actually most people walk around in a fog of their own thought without actually understanding what they're thinking, or the consequences of it.
Yeah, I agree. And, a couple of things I just took out of what you were saying, and I think this underscores that you are they say you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and you and I spend a good amount of time together. I've picked up from you, I do a better job of summarizing and reflecting, because you do a great job of that, especially when things start to get heated. So you're good at those crucial conversations. There's certain times where your desire to debate comes out, but I think for the most part, you do a really good job of summarizing, and I've picked that up from you, and I appreciate that about you. And I think that there's a component of that inside of what we read and inside of what we learned. The other thing that you brought up in your statement there is that coaches aren't necessarily experts at anything. I would say great coaches are experts at human emotion and experts really at getting the most from others, right? Like getting people, they're experts at creating a safe space. Mm-hmm. They're experts at reflecting. I mean, a few of the mentors in my life, as I read this book, I realized they had done an amazing job of reflecting. Because the mentors in my life that I've learned from, and you're certainly one of those. It's like I get these aha moments, and like, oh, okay, got it, that makes sense, and things, dots start to connect. So, and I agree with the third component there is that people just walk around life, in a fog of their own thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I think they walk around life in a fog of a lot of different things, but yeah, their thoughts certainly is one of them.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, Matt, that you do that. And it's just for me, it's like, it's just kind of natural. It's not actually conscious. I think it's become of how when I try to do that. But now I'm reading this, and maybe I need to make it even more conscious, and it'll be even better.
It comes from your debate training, and I mean, a lot of your education, and I'm sure there's some nature in there too. But I think in your education and your experience, you've picked up that people need to feel heard, and that's why you summarize, right? Because once somebody feels heard, then they're more willing to hear you.
It's funny, Matt. I think a lot of times I'm actually summarizing for myself. and it works. It's not necessarily altruistic. So. but it works. If it works, it works.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know if when you read this book, but I find that what I find interesting with this book is how disciplined she is in this process. Because because I'm not thinking this way, but I also know when I'm done, and I decide I'm now jumping to the end, and I think that's probably a mistake half the time, right? Like I might be better off just teasing it out in my conversations with people.
Yeah. Yeah, so give me an example of that.
An example of that would be, I'm mentoring essentially a cousin of mine. He's trying to get a job in finance. And I ask him questions. I try to get him to think and through it. And then he's not getting where I think he should get to. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's really not good. Coach, what she's talking about, Coach, she says you can't predetermine that much. You should know outcomes, but not predetermine that stuff. And so then I said, no, this is what you got to do. I don't want to hear this anymore. You got to go do what you're going to take care of. And instead of him getting there on his own, I'm trying to force him into a location that if he got there personally, he might have been owned it a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah,
Another example would be like, in my peer group, which had run for a while. I could probably tease things out better with them through questions and inquiry and reflection, as opposed to giving an answer. Because my wife says I'm the king of free advice, and it's worth exactly what anyone pays for it.
Has your wife been talking to my wife?
Possibly. I think that's the wife's thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's us men, I think we just have the solutions for everything, right? So that's probably why.
Funny side note, my father-in-law, he's might even be more the king of free advice than I am. And when he got in the habit of, back in the early 2000s, kind of early internet time, where right before he gives someone advice, he would say 1-800-FREEADVICE.com, and then he would go and start giving people advice. So you would know it's coming.
That's so funny. It's so funny.
And I think I bought the domain. I own 1-800-FREEADVICE.com.
Do you really?
I think I do.
That's someday we'll have to look at all your domains that you own. I've got a whole. Every now and again I audit them, and I've released a few, but yeah, I probably got way too many.
That would be a fun podcast, because I got some good ones. I got one, Fat Guys on Bikes, which would be like a stream of pictures. That would be great. Stuff like that.
Man, that's awesome.
So anyway, sorry, we're back on task. Side notes are fun, but so I think the other thing with this book is, I think, how should you think, or let's go a little. You know what? I'm torn. Should we go deeper on what the book itself and the content here, Matt? Or do you think we should jump right into where talking about how it can apply to a management situation for one of our businesses that we work with and try to advise?
I think we can do both. I have a few highlights for me that I think just are worth processing, and I'm sure you have some highlights as well. And I think what we can do is we can go through those highlights and then use them as potential case studies for examples in our own work life, or how they could apply to our audience.
Okay. Why don't we get started?
Yeah. One of my highlights, by the way, I ended up taking a bunch of notes on talk tracks.
What's that?
Meaning kind of like sentences that I could see myself using in situations. And one of the highlights for me, and this has come up, just a number of times over the years, in my work life, people say they have no idea what to do, right? So for example, you're talking through a scenario, and, as a leader, you want to ask your employee or your team member, like, hey, what do you think we should do? Or what, they've either brought you a problem or an opportunity, something, that's a scenario, right?
Right.
And it comes up where they say, well, God, I don't know what to do, right? And a few of the talk tracks that I noted, like one of the responses could be, do you have no idea, or are you questioning a solution that comes to mind?
Right.
And I think the reason that landed for me is because we have the internal censor, especially when we're talking to our boss, right?
Yeah.
We have an internal censor. But this also happens in groups where you have a great idea, but you're not willing to talk about it because you may be the only one who thinks it's a great idea. And so by responding as the coach or boss in this situation, like, hey, do you really have no idea? Or are you questioning a solution that comes to mind? Kind of creates a safe space for them to say, oh, well, I do have an idea, but I'm kind of questioning whether it's good or not. And you're like, well, out with it, right? Like, get it out.
Yeah.
And so I think that's great. The other one that I thought maybe isn't as rock solid, but is a pretty decent response to that is, you have many life experiences. I bet you have some ideas. And that one is almost like not letting them off the hook, because I think naturally we want to be let off the hook by saying, no, I don't really have a solution, but boss, I know you do, right? And then it's like, of course, we're back to the boss being the bottleneck. The last one that, by the way, is my favorite, and I have used it probably more times than I'd like to admit since I finished this book. I've used it in coaching calls. I've used it in our peer group sessions. I've used it with our team. If you had nothing to lose, what would you try? Because again, it's that internal censor. We have ideas, but our subconscious kills off those ideas before they can even make it to our conscious brain. And I think that's a great one. So lastly, and I've used this one in a different way before I read the book, and I think it's fantastic. I learned to turn the coaching around on people when they're in this scenario, and it works really, really well. Just used it the other day. Have you ever observed someone else in this position or scenario? What would you suggest them to do? And so it almost turns it around to say, hey, if you were talking to a friend at a bus stop, well, if you're in Barcelona, right? If you're talking to a friend at a, whatever, and your friend said they had this problem, what might you suggest them to do? And that's really, really powerful, because people, when they get turned into the coach, they actually have really great ideas.
1-800-FREEADVICE.com.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So anyway, I know that was a little bit of a lengthy monologue, but the response to people saying they have no idea what to do, I thought was really fantastic.
But and I think what you're getting on and getting to, and I think this is where is a good place to be around as a manager or boss who inherently some part of your team or all your team is going to have a level of fear in that relationship, right? Maybe fear is the wrong word, but there's definitely a power dynamic, right?
%. Yeah.
Right. And so you want to manage that power dynamic as a boss or manager in such a way that allows someone to fulfill themselves for the betterment of the business. If you're a good one, sometimes you just want a yes man because you're a bad one, but that's a different story, right? Yeah. If you're a good one, you want to unlock, but people are hesitant to unlock themselves because they're either embarrassed, they're shy, they're insecure, imposter syndrome. They just want to put their head down, whatever it is. So it's how do you break through all of that? And I think in this book is her focus is how do you break through that wall, right?
Yeah.
And this reflective inquiry, where it's using your own words, is a really good place. I think it's really interesting the point you brought up is when people says I have no idea or I don't know. What's given me the ability to break through that the most is actually teaching college classes. Like nobody says I don't know more than a college student who just has a hangover.
Right.
And I'm one of those professors that does not let that answer stand. Like I will sit in silence for a few minutes and say, no, come on, let it out, and then let them figure it out. Or what she does is use questions to build engagement. And then it starts coming. And like you could tell most of them read something or have some concept. They may be wrong and in some way, and you got to bring them back in, but it requires that active inquiry and reflection on what they say to get to a place that's valuable.
Yeah, that's interesting. So a little bit of a tangent here. We'll come back.
Yeah,
How long have you been a college professor?
Well, it depends on how you want to judge it. So the first time I taught any sort of college level stuff was 2007 when I built out the mid-core Middlebury class around, something totally different. I did that for a few years, and I was small stuff, not really lecture. But then I've been teaching at Monmouth since 2018. I think 1 or 2 classes a year, but a variety of classes, accounting, legal, and like business law, accounting, business law, and constitutional law.
Got it. Okay. So interesting. Well, and you may not be able to answer this, but what, at a hypothesis that I'll throw out there, or I'll throw out a question that might confirm my hypothesis. But so you really have you kind of have 2 seasons of teaching, right? You had it almost 20 years ago in 2007, and then more recent, modern, in the last 5 years or 6 years, actually almost 7. So have your students, their desire, ability to interact in a public forum, have you noticed a change, like a generational change between, say, those 2 cohorts, your more modern ones and the ones from 20 years ago?
I'm going to give you 3 cohorts.
Okay.
The first cohort is obviously back then, and there was a task that I in designing the curriculum for this class, which was all about taking liberal arts students and applying their skills to the real world situations, was cold calling businesses to get opinions from them. And the professors I worked on this for this were against this. They said, kids don't do that these days. They're afraid. And I'm like, no, this is something you got to do. I did it when I were in my businesses in college. I made cold calls, sold advertising. They got to do it. So they put it in. They were nervous. They went out and did it. And they came back like, wow, that actually worked. It was awesome. So, these were self-selected, high-performing students who were signing up for an incredibly intensive class during January term, which is normally the bum off and ski term. So it was a different kind of group, right? But so they were nervous, but they did it. And look, a lot of them at that point still didn't have cell phones, or they had, a flip phone. There's no social media kind of burying yourself.
Yeah.
But the reason I said there's 3 cohorts is there's 2 groups that I have that are different. There's pre-COVID and post-COVID.
Oh, right.
Right. The pre-COVID classes I took, which were basically 3 years, 18, 19, and 20. 20 was spring 20 was a little weird, but it was still pre-COVID for all intents and purposes. They were engaged. They raised their hand. People spoke. It was a regular piece of regular student engagement. Post-COVID, it's starting to get a little better, but it was like pulling teeth to get them to engage in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think just being buried for 2 years in your formative, either high school or early college, really, really hurt the development of kids. And I saw it firsthand. And these are just the same university, same classes, but completely different impact as far as willingness to get up and speak or engage.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt.
I'll give you another example though. It's like this was pre-COVID, and I was teaching a business law class, and part of that class is I had mock trials, and these were kids who had never heard of this before. So, part of it was getting up and giving an opening statement about a case that we were going through, and one of the girls in the class came up to me, the week before she was doing it, and says, "Professor, I'm not ready for this. I can't speak in front of people. You have to let me out. I get too nervous." And I said, "I'm not letting you out. You're going to get up and you're going to do a great job. I'm not worried about it. You're going to be fine." So because she was so nervous, she prepared, and she absolutely gave the best opening statement of everybody anyone in the semester.
That's awesome. Love that.
So I told her that, and it kind of like it unlocked her.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's great that you get to make a difference in people's lives, because I think it takes us standing for each other to open that up. And I witnessed that firsthand. I put myself through college while I was working full time. And so I went through University of Phoenix. At the time, they were in person and online. I was, doing the in-person program. So every single week we'd go to class. And a huge part of the work that we did was presentations. We gave presentations every week. Right. And of course, we had people, I've always been very comfortable in front of an audience. And we had people that literally would get sick, right? Like they'd have to go puke and then do the presentation. So everybody, all across the board. But I saw, this throughout the entire program, people would really change, because it was a group setting where there was 5 to 7 of us in a group, and we were responsible for everyone in our group. And if you had somebody in your group who wasn't a great speaker, you couldn't just let them skate by, right? Like you had to stand for them to say, "Hey, look, you're gonna push through and work through this." So it was incredible to see everybody in our class grow as public speakers, and being able to put presentations together and have meaningful dialogue in front of groups. It was pretty amazing.
That's great. How did you, for those ones that were having a hard time there in your group, what were the ways that you were able to get them motivated and to get through it and perform?
I think part of it was recognizing for themselves that there was nothing to be scared about. So those of us who were comfortable, we would show them, like, look, there's nothing that can happen here, right? Like, and I think just experiencing it was helpful. But then also I would ask them, like in my group, I had one person who really struggled. I would like unpack their fears and help them realize that their fears are totally unfounded, right?
Right.
And I think once they recognized that, the anxiety reduced. And then putting the reps in, of course, reduced the anxiety. In some cases, they were fearful of sounding ridiculous. They're fearful of forgetting things. All of these fears, and we would just kind of like work through them one by one and say, "Hey, you know what? If you're scared of forgetting something, well, what can you do to overcome that? I guess I could study more. Okay. And I think they realized like all of their fears were totally in their control. And once they gave space for the fear and took control over the fear, that would change for them. And then really it's about the reps as we all know.
Oh yeah. It's getting in front of people and not, because even great speakers often say their knees are shaking. They have butterflies before they get up. It's just the nature of the beast. I think one of the best ways to get over that fear of being in front of people is to sing karaoke. Because I am a terrible singer. Like I have no pitch. I've got no ear. I've got nothing. But I am great at karaoke. And just not having the fear. Just know that you're gonna have fun, be up there, and people appreciate that you're going for it.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me. This week I missed a couple classes because of travel, but this week I was back in my improv class. I have about 4 more weeks left.
Oh, cool.
And boy, that'll break you real quick of any fear of being ridiculous, because that's literally 3 hours of being ridiculous every Tuesday, and it's a lot of fun.
I mean, this is fun. We're not talking about the book at all, but it's really great. But we'll get back to that. What made you want to go join an improv class? I've never done it, but it seems like it'd be a blast.
Yeah. A few reasons. One, my life either is, in front of a computer or out on the road presenting to audiences. I don't actually get much time to be with humans in my community. And so that was part of it, right? Like other than my loved ones, if you will, and my friends, that was part of it. Just get around more strangers, more frequently. So
unappreciated thing. Like it's actually great to get around strangers.
Yeah. Because I realized a lot of times as we get older, we have just less of an interest in having a circle, right? Our circle gets smaller and smaller, I think. So that was part of it. The other part is I recognized that in order for me to continue to grow as a public speaker, I needed to find other emotions I needed to find a way to move the audience better. And so because I enjoy public speaking, I think it's one of the biggest challenges that I've recently tried to improve. And the component I feel like I'm missing is the ability to emote properly on stage and get the audience to emote with me. So that was part of it. And then the other part is just my whole life, people have known me as a buttoned-up guy. I'm a pretty buttoned-up guy. Just getting outside of that comfort zone and being a little more ridiculous. I shouldn't say my whole life. I actually, up until my early 20s, was like a lot less buttoned up. I don't know, something changed, as I got older. But I was a much more fun guy to be around when I was younger. So it's like, I got to get back to that ridiculous young self and
that's good.
Not care so much about what people think. And I feel like what a great place an improv class would be for that.
That's cool. Did you go up to LA? So it's like all actors, or was it in Orange County with more locals?
It's in Orange County at the South Coast Repertory, which is Orange County's kind of biggest theater. Like it's a very legit theater program. And the instructor, it's like been doing it for 30 years. He writes for Disney and all these others. He's freaking hilarious. But yeah, it's as much of a brain exercise as it is anything. We spend the first hour and a half doing really just exercises, getting our brains warmed up.
That's cool. I think I might have to look into it.
I think you would enjoy it.
I'd enjoy it. It's there's a creative aspect. There's such a creative aspect to improv that people don't. I mean, I think, and it kind of gets me back to this book a little bit. Like one of the things that people get into that I think coaches are the reason for a coach is getting people out of ruts. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. A rut is comfortable. It's consistent. You can put it on cruise control, but it's not. As you said, it's not fun. It's not really fun. It doesn't make you any better. Improv, like what you're describing it, is like, let me jump out of this rut and turn left into the woods and until I hit a tree, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, and that's where you find really, really great places, is the bushwhacking. But the coaching, the way that she's describing it in reflective inquiry, is getting people to find that in essentially in a work situations where she's really talking about professional coaching.
Yeah.
Right. And I kind of just made that connection with this. And I'm kind of just freewheeling it. I'm just trying to find a note that I found. I wrote down a note that I think is really similar to this. let me see here. So yeah, so on page 56, using masterful coaching techniques that challenge and disturb habitual thought patterns is developmental instead of operational. Expanding clients, so exploring what didn't work is part of it, is that you want to expand clients' perspective. The conversations may feel uncomfortable, but the outcomes are remarkable.
Yeah. I have a perfect example of this. So 2 days ago in our CEO peer group, we call it our Edge peer group, I think there's 10 of us in that group. We lead, other CEOs. And we have one of our members who decided to leave. He says, hey, I've got all these challenges. I need to put my head down and go work on these challenges. And a couple of our members really pushed back. And they're like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you leave the group that's, that helps you get over these challenges? And it was really great. These members started asking questions like Marcia talks about in this book. And I mean, the emotions were running high, right? This member who was looking to leave was just really emotional. But he started really getting clear about what's happening. And he keeps things close to the chest, this guy. But I think what he found was he recognized that, like, hey, being in a group of people who are holding me accountable is hard when I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. And me leaving the group feels great because I don't have that pressure anymore, but that's not going to get me any closer to my goals, right?
No.
And so I think that's what came out of that conversation is he had this aha moment. You could literally see it in his eyes. His emotions changed. He had this aha moment that, like, hey, me leaving the group is actually just giving myself an excuse to continue not succeeding, right? Where if I lived into the vulnerability of this group the way that I should, I think I'm going to succeed better. So just awesome. A really, really interesting example of that.
It's perfect. And I think that's it. Like, getting to that uncomfortable place where you are forced to think about reality as opposed to your own unreality is all the difference.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yep. One other highlight for me, she breaks this down, and I think there's applications, in the leadership world, not just the professional coaching world for this. She breaks down coaching really simply. It provides value when these three things are met, right? First, the outcome for the coaching session is identified.
Yep.
And so in a professional coaching environment, you set up a meeting, it becomes very easy. In a leadership environment, you don't always have a formal coaching session, right? It could be a curbside coaching, it could be a one-to-one, it could be a annual review or semi-annual review, whatever. Those are the more formal examples. The informal example could be that somebody just asks you a question about something, right? And that could that question could turn into a coaching session. And I think what I would love for our audience, the leaders in our audience, to recognize is that sometimes those informal moments, if you can get to understanding what the person needs from you, right, through something like, hey, what do you need from me right now? That could turn into the coaching session and define the outcome. So once you've defined the outcome, you're now in a coaching session, right?
Right.
The second piece that she breaks down in coaching providing value is that blocks are discovered, and those blocks are usually emotional blocks, belief blocks, or conflict blocks, right?
And when you say, I just wanted to make sure people understand when we say blocks, these are mental, somehow within the person that is being coached, the client or the employee or whatever, that's preventing them from reaching an outcome. Right.
So kind of like our example earlier about somebody, I mean, look, this probably plays out a million times every day in business, right? An employee or team member comes to their boss or their lead and says, hey, I'm struggling with XYZ. I don't know what to do. And then, as we talked about earlier, the boss could say, do you really not know what to do? Or are you, I'm paraphrasing here, are you, filtering your response, or, whatever the case may be.
Right.
And inside of that, when that employee or team member recognizes that they are either consciously or subconsciously filtering their ideas, that's a block that's unlocked, right? They recognize like, oh shit, I guess I do have ideas. I just keep killing them off before they make it to my mouth, right? So those are examples. I don't know, do you have any other examples of blocks, like emotional or belief blocks that resonate with you, or some examples from your work?
Let me try to think. I think some of the blocks that happen is just an unwillingness, a kind of subconscious unwillingness to recognize a personal limitation sometimes. Like that's a big block.
Yeah.
And it impacts people dramatically. But if you can recognize a limitation or something that maybe you need help with, then you can actually improve or help course correct or shift. It's not that a limitation is a negative or a bad. We all have them. But unless an individual addresses them, it's going to be a problem. Like she gave a great example in the book. Is there was the point of this one woman wanted to be, take a leadership role, and she had a good personal relationship with these people in the company. They're all men, like an engineering team.
Yeah.
But then in a meeting, she'd be very negative and correcting them on things. And so what she had to figure out is one of her limitations was her impatience in listening to others' ideas and when working through them in a reasonable way. She just wanted to cut them off and go. And it just made her so she couldn't get promoted. Marcia worked with this woman to get through that and be more patient in those conversations, which allowed her to achieve the leadership role she wanted and progress in the company. Like that limitation it's recognizing what are the pieces of you as a person that inhibit your ability to move forward the way you want. And that's a hard skill. I think when coaches that do that really, really achieve great things.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So you brought that up, and I hope Patrick doesn't mind me sharing this. I'm sure he doesn't. But Patrick Martinez, our partner in the Elite Sales Academy, fantastic coach, been doing it for a long time. Really great dude, all around amazing human. And he and I were talking the other day, and he created an aha moment for me. He's a fast moving guy. Mm-hmm. He's fast paced, gets a lot accomplished. And he mentioned to me, he says, Matt, you're one of, I don't remember exactly his words, but he's like, you're one of the fastest paced guys I know. And in that moment, I realized the conflict blocker that, I know that I operate at a different frequency than most, but, when somebody who I think is, a fast operator and, moves quickly and gets a lot of things accomplished, says to me that I'm, next level, I realize man, maybe that's not great. Like my expectations for how people should perform are probably out of alignment from reality, right? And he essentially said yeah, your expectations of what can get accomplished in a certain period of time are out of context or out of reality. And so it was just really interesting. I mean, I love again, another example of how if you surround yourself with amazing people, you level up. It's like, man, he unlocked that for me. Good. In that moment. Yeah.
And he's right. And I think I'm glad recognizing that. I think it'll make you a better leader when you recognize your own limitations too.
Yeah.
Right. That's funny. I mean, Patrick is a good one. I'm gonna plug it because we have to plug every once in a while. Is our Elite Sales Academy run by Patrick has had some really great outcomes. Anyone who's listening to this, doesn't matter what industry, if your sales team is having some problems, come check out the Elite Sales Academy. And if you mention our podcast, we'll let you listen in on a free session.
Yep. Good.
Matt, if you want to have that edited out, you're more than welcome. But because that was not pre-planned at all, that was on the fly. But let's see what happens.
Yeah, I'm good with it. So the third piece that she breaks down as far as coaching sessions being valuable is an achievable next step. And I actually think this is the piece that gets left out so often in employee and leadership conversations. 100%. Is that I believe, and I mean, I'm projecting here a little bit from my own experiences, but I've also witnessed this with some of our members and other people that I've worked with, is that the leader or manager might have in their mind a clear vision of what the next step is. They haven't had the employee or team member explain it in their own words. And that's been a huge revelation for me. I wish I would have learned this decades ago. Having them, and by the way, I still screw this up plenty, but having the team member or the employee repeat it in their own words is so powerful, because at that moment you realize, like, hey, we're in alignment or we're not. And if you're out of alignment, you can course correct, versus what happens so often with leaders is they just get let down. Like, hey, we had this hour-long conversation about this topic. You went out into the world and we're supposed to do this thing. I was let down because the thing didn't look or act or feel or smell like what I thought it should. And that often happens, when the reality is it's the leader's responsibility to say, hey, Joe or Sally or whoever, like, we just talked about a lot of stuff. Why don't you tell me what you feel like are the next steps?
I think this is the critical piece to this whole thing. And there's a few points. When I do, we have, if we're presenting, right? If you're presenting, one of the big problems with presenting, whether it's at a conference or whatever, is people come out of that session, and I know it happens to you a lot because your sessions are awesome. Say, that was great. I learned a ton. But then they go out and they go back to the business and they fall in their same rut, because your wheel just gets in the rut. Mm-hmm. They don't find that next step. And I know this is something you're working on really hard, and I've noticed it. It's like, and I think you're changing the way that education happens when you're at a conference in a really positive way. But because if you don't have that next step, nothing ever happens. So all of these people who say, great session, whatever, if they don't have that next step with some accountability, I think the accountability of the next step is almost number 4, right? It's useless. You actually didn't accomplish a thing. You just wasted time.
Totally. And what's funny is I witness more often than not, the issue is that they have too many next steps. Mm-hmm. They're trying to boil the ocean, and they don't get any of it done. So I think the key here is picking the one thing, right? And I know that was my takeaway in reading the book. It's like a coach or a leader's responsibility is to help this person pick the one thing that they're going to do, not the 10 things that need to get done, and just move the needle one step at a time.
Yeah, that it's not number 3 wasn't next step. It was achievable next step. Those are different things. Yeah. So let's go back and look at these 3. Like, I think this is one of those key things that a manager or leader, someone who's running a company, should internalize in how they're dealing with this. We had number 1, outcome. Kind of in the beginning of this conversation, define that outcome in some way. It doesn't have to be a big outcome of what the conversation is going to accomplish, so that you have kind of a roadmap. Number 2, what are the blocks? What are the things that are preventing the person you're talking to from accomplishing what they want or finding their outcome? And number 3 is defining an achievable next step that allows that person, that is the client, the person who's being coached, to come out of that session being able to do something that moves the needle. Mm-hmm. And if you think as a manager, in your conversation, in not every conversation, some conversations are not this, but in your conversations with your team, where you can tell that there's something, you got to help address an issue, instead of solving the issue, like, do this, you walk through this process. It doesn't have to be long. It can be 5 minutes, right? How much more powerful is that?
Right. Well, it also relieves the manager or leader of being the bottleneck. Mm-hmm. Right. The challenge, and specific to, I think, luxury home service businesses, the challenge for a lot of leaders in luxury home services is they've done all of the jobs before. Mm-hmm. And so they know how to do it better than, I'm using air quotes, they know how to do it better than their employees every time. And so what we've experienced in companies that struggle to grow is that you have either the owner or multiple leaders in the organization that are the bottlenecks, because they are giving all of the free advice, or they are giving all of the answers, rather than being good coaches and leading their team to solve their own problems.
Or they just fully abdicate.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, perfection, I mean, I don't know that perfection exists, right? I mean, I still screw this up plenty. You do, I'm sure. And I mean, just
every day.
right. But it's like getting 1% better at it. And you recognize when you look back. I mean, like when I look back, and I don't want this to be about me, but I was just actually on the way into the office today, or studio, on the way to the studio today, I was actually just like looking back mentally at the type of leader I was 20 years ago. Like, oh my God, I was terrible, right? Like, I can't believe that people worked for me, but in the scheme of things, I wasn't that bad, but boy, I've learned so much, and I continue to learn so much, right? And it's like, I don't think perfection can be achieved. I think we all know incredible leaders and mentors. They're just steps ahead of where we are, right? And so I think also putting this pressure on ourselves as managers to get all of this perfect all the time leads to some even bigger challenges.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I feel so that's on the leadership side. That's on the coach and developing that leadership method that you've done really well since your first business 20 years. As you've been actually managing people in a variety of capacities for over 20 years.
Yeah.
When you think back, like
That's true.
when you were running teams at Circuit City 25 years ago.
19. Yeah, I was at 19. So yeah, 26 years ago. Oh.
And so it's not something that comes easy in a second to people.
Oh. No.
I think people who are running luxury home services businesses, the leadership and the management comes after their doings, right? Everybody starts as a trunk slammer. There's no other way around it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, these days there's obviously, entrepreneurship through acquisition, right? But yeah, I think if you look at broadly in any industry, plumber, electrician, pool builder, cabinet maker, AV company, yeah, I mean, most of them started by working with their hands or being an incredible salesperson or both.
Right. Which is not leading or managing anybody. It's doing a job. And because you were good at your job, somehow you ended up with people that relied on you as a manager or a leader without really realizing it happened.
Yeah.
And it's how do you think about, and how do you think through those things? I think, and that's kind of the thing where I think this book gets, and I think, we're about an hour, so let's, wrap it up shortly. But I think that's where this book is useful, is when you're thinking about how you have to manage your teams, what are some things that you should do that take you out of that doer mode, because you're always in it, you're never going to get out of it for the most part, and put you into that developmental mode so that your team can perform in your absence.
Yeah. Yep. And I think, I know we got to wrap up here, but before we do, I want to touch on sort of the end of the book, which I found to be really fantastic. And it's funny, it aligns with a bunch of other things I've read and some of the practices I have, which are the 3 mental habits, right? And, creating psychological safety, opening up the centers of your nervous system, and really that's through the arc of coaching. And I think that alone, just that one section of the book can be so powerful for leaders in the organization to recognize that if you just do those 3 things, like, there's a lot in this book that's really hard to, especially at our age, it's like hard to sort of shift your mind around. But like the arc of coaching really comes down to making sure you're in the right mindset before you get into one of these conversations. And sometimes you don't have the luxury of doing that. Like, somebody asks you a question, you can't say, "Hey, let me give me 10 minutes while I go do some meditation and then we can talk." But, before your one-to-ones, before your annual reviews or semi-annual reviews or whatever, you can do this stuff. And I've actually tried it quite a bit lately, and it's pretty awesome. So I'd love to dig into that.
Yeah, why don't we do this? Let's just list the 3, just so we're clearly what the 3 things that were mentioned.
Yeah. So the arc of coaching, and arc stands for align your brain. So really just getting sort of present in what you're about to do, and that's a little bit of a little woo-woo meditation stuff, but it's like relax your body, detach yourself from your thoughts that are in your mind, center your awareness, right? And that could be literally 1 or 2 minutes of just thinking about your breaths, and then focus on the emotion that you want to feel. And I think that's the piece with the brain alignment, or the first step, that's so important for me is, what's the emotion that I want circulating in my body before I go into this meeting? Do I want the emotion circulating in my body that, I can't stand this person and they're, terrible employee? Or do I want the emotion in my body like, hey, I really love this person and I think they could do an amazing job. They're just falling short, whatever. The second piece is R, which is receive. Don't just listen. So this I've struggled with over the years and I think, all of us probably can do a better job of just creating space for whatever this person's going through or whatever emotions they're having or whatever the case may be, because their reality is their reality, right?
Right.
And then the third one is C, for catch and release judgment. And what I love, the first point she makes is, in order to release judgment, you have to first accept that you're judgmental, right? And it's like, you have to realize, like, most humans are judgmental, some of us more than others. I'm pretty high on that scale. The more you create space for, like, hey, you're judgmental, you can just release that judgment. You can recognize that it's happening. So anyway, those are the three.
I think it's a really good point. That third one, I think, is really hard for people, because you know what? Because the kind of I don't know necessarily the flip side of judgment is it's not just recognizing that you're judgy or judging somebody else. It's recognizing that it's possible that your judgment is wrong.
Yeah.
Because I think when most people says, I'm not judging, I'm just saying what I see, right? Just telling the truth. No, you're not. You're giving an opinion on some external perceived situation that you've decided to give a perception about that would be different than if you were doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And so that's actually the hardest. And I read that too, and it didn't resonate with me the way it resonated with you when I was reading it. When I read it, in my mind, this is all wishy-washy stuff. What am I doing?
Of course. Yep.
And the way you describe it was really great. And I'm trying to think, how do I do these things? And I'm like, I think this is a place that we're different. Mm-hmm. That first one, which is the emotion, I'm really good at jumping between stuff, whether it's emotion or task, and isolating. So I could, there's times where I could have done something that drove me crazy before, like a podcast session, and I'll just flip my switch. It's hard. I don't know why I can. It's just like, I guess it's, I don't know, use our culture, and I guess it's my low D. Where
I was about to look you up. I think, yeah, it's on there somewhere.
Yeah. The second one, it wasn't reflect, it was receive. That's actually, this one to me is really useful, the way you describe it, as opposed to listening, because there's an emotive component to it. And for those out there that are single, this is really valuable in a date, I'm sure, when you're listening to your person you're going out with. It actually reminds me, side note, and last side note, I was just watching old Super Bowl commercials because I was bored and it was on TV like late at night when I was on a business trip. And they had one Bud Light commercial where it was a guy and a girl sitting at a bar, and the girl was talking and complaining about her friend and all this other stuff, and the guy was sitting there looking, and had a ton of emotion on his face, and then you look, and he's actually watching the football game over her shoulder, and she doesn't know it. And then, she turns to him and says, "You are such a good listener." And he brings his beer. And it was like he got the best of both worlds, is I think what the title of the commercial. He got the value of being the good listener, but still got to watch the game. So not necessarily what we're talking about, but essentially he was receiving even if he wasn't listening. But yeah, that one I think is the hardest for people. I don't know, which one of those three is the hardest for people, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think that'd be a pretty big generalization, but I think
which was the hardest for you?
For me, catching and releasing judgment really landed. And she goes through like 6 misunderstood reactions. I'm generally, people have told me I have high EQ, right? I generally am dead on with people's feelings and what's going on. Or so I've been told. These 6 commonly misunderstood reactions that she goes through, I've misunderstood those before. And it's nervous laughter, change in eye contact, easy, quick agreement, tears, defensiveness, and hesitation. And she goes through some word tracks around those, and we don't have time to get into them. But that was actually one of my favorite parts of the book.
All right. Well, thank you for another great episode of The Flywheel Effect. If you are interested in reading this book, there will be a link in the notes for you to buy it on Amazon, either, Kindle or hard copy, your choice. But if you have any comments or thoughts once you watch this episode, please drop us a note. Love to chat with you on LinkedIn. And as always, if you'd enjoyed this episode, leave us a follow, give us a like, or share it with a friend. And again, until next time, this is The Flywheel Effect. And I'm Brent Sonnek-Schmelz and Matt Bernath. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you for tuning in to The Flywheel Effect. Our journey through the intricate world of luxury home services continues to be fueled by your passion for excellence and innovation. If you found value in our conversations today, don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. More insights and resources. Visit us online at growwithvital.com. Until next time.